been 23 years since I did a comedy special.
I've been gone for a very long time. Surprise, it's me.
I stopped doing stand-up in 1992.
One of the things that I mentioned in my 2018 Best of video is all of the returns that we've been seeing from these semi-retired famous comedians. These huge names in comedy that haven't performed in about 15 years on average are coming back and making specials for Netflix. You know, maybe it's because they really miss stand-up. More likely it's because Netflix is throwing obscene amounts of money at them. But comedians like Dave Chappelle, Chris Rock, Judd Apatow, Adam Sandler, Ellen DeGeneres, Jerry Seinfeld, huge names are making specials for the first time in a decade or two. And it's sweet and it's fun and it's sentimental. But you know, you watch these specials and yeah, they're more famous and they're definitely more loaded and probably less relatable. Ellen did a good job cashing in on that.
And he said, well, do you think you're still relatable? Just then, Batu, my butler, stepped into the library.
But there was only one that felt new from this comedian. Judd Apatow, for example, still felt like Judd Apatow, still as charming and domestic as he ever was. Ellen DeGeneres was as unobtrusive as she has ever been, aggressively likable. Jerry Seinfeld is still as nerdy as he ever was. But Chris Rock is doing something different. Chris Rock is a new man and a new comedian performing for a different America. Sure, it was a ton of money from Netflix. Sure, comedy's like cool right now, I guess. But Chris Rock really had something to say, and he used that special to say it. And that's not true of most of these comedians. Let's talk about Chris Rock, okay? Chris Rock grew up in the 70s and 80s in Bed-Stuy. He was a little nerdy kid growing up in the ghetto. He was bused to an all-white school in a pretty bad neighborhood too. He got bullied pretty aggressively. When he was a teenager, he started performing stand-up all over the greater New York City area. He started having some small parts in movies, and then in 1990 he got his first big break. He got cast on SNL. But it wasn't really ever a great fit for him. He was constantly compared to Eddie Murphy, which is no fun for anyone. Eddie Murphy, by the way, is only 4 years older than Chris Rock, which messed me up to kind of realize that. Eddie Murphy broke so young. But anyway, yeah, Chris Rock, he was there for a few years. It was never really a good fit. They never really knew how to use him very well. And in 1993, he was let go. And Living Color was on at the same time, which probably would have been a better fit for him.
How much for a light bill?
150.
150? Good Lord, that don't sound too light to me. Why don't you wring out the dirty bar rag in my mouth?
SNL was pretty square. It still kind of is. But after that, he was kind of unmoored. You know, he didn't really know who he was or what he was doing. He talks about there's one particular set that he did that Martin Lawrence opened for him, and Martin Lawrence was so fun and loud and animated, and he just destroyed, and then Chris Rock had to follow it, and it was just painful. And that was kind of the beginning of Chris Rock learning how to perform. He'd always been a brilliant mind, he'd always been a great thinker and a great joke writer, but he had to figure out how to tell his own jokes. Once he mastered that, he was unstoppable. His first big moment was in 1996, his special Bring the Pain. That's the special that changed everything. Everyone was quoting it, it was super in the zeitgeist, and it showed comedians what comedians were capable of. There were stories of other comedians kind of quitting around that time because they saw it and they was like, oh, I could never do that. Why am I even trying? It was huge. He was loud, he was blunt, the audience was booing him at some points. That's how like controversial and dangerous he was, yet still so meticulous. It's a fun balance with Chris Rock there. He had tons to say, he was unafraid of anything, he was always stalking the stage. His main influences were, on the one hand, hip-hop. He kind of says outright that he stole one of his best bits from the song Us by Ice Cube.
Yes, ain't coming up is a must, but before we can come up, take a look at us.
And on the other side of the spectrum, he was greatly influenced by the pulpit. He takes a lot of his cadence from preachers. That's a huge part of his performance style, including his grandfather, who was actually a pastor in South Carolina.
My dad's father was a preacher. I used to spend a lot of time with him. I would watch him write his sermons, I pretty much do what he did. He'd write the topics, and then he would riff on the topics, and I kind of do comedy like he preached.
Throughout the 90s and 2000s, he was doing stand-up pretty regularly, releasing albums on HBO, and he was having bigger and bigger parts in films. Specials like Bigger and Blacker in 1999, Never Scared in 2005, and Kill the Messenger in 2008. And, you know, after about 2008, after that special, he kind of went off the map a little bit. He had some smaller projects that he was working on, of course the grown-ups movies that he did with his friends, and voicing Marty the Zebra, which he has said has made him more money than all of the stand-up he's ever done, so that's absurd, but that's the industry. My guess is that he's been busy being a dad and counting his money. No shame in that. That's what I'm sure all of the comedians on that list were doing too.
Not that it's harder to be funny when you have more money. It's harder to leave your house and work on it.
I mean, it's lame. It's a lot more fun to sit in your mansion than bomb with new material, but bombing with new material is how you get to kill with old material. You gotta start. You gotta. So let's talk about this return. Let's talk about Tambourine that came out in 2018. As the AV Club pointed out, there's a very clear distinction between the first and the second half of Tambourine, but there's a real shift. So let's start with the how. What was Chris Rock doing up on that stage? While he still has the vibrancy and the movement that he always has, he's an older man now, and so there has been a mellowing of his physicality and of his vocals and of the kind of way in which he presents himself. There's still a danger to him. You know, after jokes he would say things like, "Yeah, I said it," kind of daring the audience to be offended.
On Netflix, I said that.
He starts off the special with a bang, with a pretty playfully offensive joke, which is a fun way of testing the audience.
You would think the cops would occasionally shoot a white kid just to make it look good.
The opening joke of a stand-up special is really important because you're either going to get the audience on your side right away or you're not. So most comedians will start off with a joke a little safer, a little easier to digest. But Chris Rock's not playing that game. He's gonna hit you with a joke about race and police brutality right away, and you're either on board or you're not. I love when comedians do this. This is something that Carlin used to always do all the time. I'll link below to a particular set I'm thinking of where Carlin just starts with a crazy joke, and you're either on board or you're not. I respect the hell out of it. Sometimes it's stupid, but I love it. His joke construction is the same as what we're used to from Chris Rock. It's the same kind of bricks that build into the joke. He still does those big repeats for emphasis whenever he's kind of refocusing himself.
Sorry, love hard or get out. Love hard or get out, okay? You hear me?
He still builds a case in that same way that we were talking about earlier, combining the preacher and the Def Jam and the litigator all in one kind of hot pot.
If you live with a woman, you don't have a house. I want you to try. Fellas, when you go home tonight, I want you to try to hang up a picture of your mother.
So let's talk about the production a little bit. This is not at the Apollo. This is at a tiny venue. This is a really small room for a performer as big and loud as Chris Rock. So that initially is a huge change. And who directed this special? Bo Burnham, of all people. Yeah, Chris Rock hired Bo Burnham to direct the special probably after seeing his work on Gerard Carmichael's 8 that was directed by Bo, and of course he probably saw Bo's own work. If anyone's having a moment right now with directing and lighting and comedy, it's Bo. And that decision to hire him I think is really telling. He was going for a different vibe. He wasn't going for a concert or a party vibe like his vibes had been in the past. He wanted something a little bit more intimate, and he made the right call there.
You can be absolutely anything you want to be. I'm like, lady, why are you lying to these children? Maybe 4 of them could be anything they want to be. But the other 2,000 better learn how to weld.
Now, as I said, the special is pretty easily divided into the first and the second half. The first half has some really brilliant stuff. He talks about police brutality, he talks about bullying, he talks about his daughters, he talks a little bit about Trump. But the second half of that special is something altogether different. This is a lot less Def Jam inspired and is a lot more, honestly, alternative comedy and one-man show inspired.
Anybody can make people scream. It's like, can you make them quiet? Dude, I was not like a good husband. I was up, man. Divorce, man. You don't want no parts of this shit, man.
It's the first time we've ever really seen Chris Rock look inward. He talks about the role he played in his divorce. He talks about his porn addiction. He talks about that he might have lost his daughters.
I had to go through a custody fight for my kids just to see my kids, man.
He talks about going to divorce court and what that all looked like. There's some real moments. And of course there are jokes throughout, but this is a perspective we've never seen from Chris Rock. I really want to take a moment to respect how rad that is. We don't get to see experts trying new things very often, and I love that. Now, I do have to say, something that took a little bit of the wind out of the sails of this whole I cheated and I'm getting divorced thing is that anyone paying at least a little bit of attention probably saw this coming.
It's a man gonna be a man. A man is basically as faithful as his options.
Like in marriage. Marriage to me is not even a natural state to be married for life. Anything for life just promotes laziness, okay?
Married and bored or single and lonely. That's right. Marriage is some boring.
I mean, he made a movie a decade ago about a man contemplating cheating on his wife. He starred and directed in a movie called I Think I Love My Wife. Yeah, so that movie came out in 2007. Who did he co-write it with? Interesting. And who got divorced in 2008? Double interesting. Super interesting. Moving on. Let's talk about my favorite part. This comes down to the persona. This is the why. So we talked about the material and we talked about the delivery, the how and the what, but let's talk about the why. Why does any of this matter? One of my favorite things about stand-up is that you get to be inside someone's head for 60 minutes. And that's incredible for people like me, who obviously, wouldn't you know it, don't have a ton in common with Chris Rock. But when I listen to his specials, I get to hear his thoughts and I get to understand his perspective. Comedy is one of the most amazing tools for understanding perspective. I don't think anything is more indicative into a person's values than what they find funny. It's one of the best things that a comedian has in their arsenal. And now we get this whole other level of a new perspective, because how often do you see someone talking about their role that they played in their own divorce? It's not that often. Sometimes, you know, there's comedians like Pete Holmes or Mark Maron who are really giving of their vulnerability, but this is something new.
Here's the thing, when guys cheat, it's like we want something new. You want something new, right? But then you know what happens? Your woman finds out, and now she's new.
You get to see Chris Rock really kind of deciding in real time what he wants to do and how much of himself he wants to give.
She's never the same again. So now you got new, but you got a bad new. You know, you got bad new, man.
Okay, this is what I want to leave you with. He could have phoned this in. I don't think people realize that. He could have phoned it in, it would have been fine, and who cares? But he didn't. He made these decisions, the smaller venue, hiring Bo Burnham, allowing himself to talk about these things that are real in his life. These are active, difficult decisions that he made for his fan base and for his art form. That's pretty awesome. You know, I mentioned how he was always compared to Eddie Murphy, and that was true, and maybe there were some things in his topics or in his physicality that compared him to Eddie Murphy, but Chris Rock is not Eddie Murphy.
That's the shame of it all. You're black, so you get compared to Eddie Murphy.
Right.
But in reality, I'm just ripping off George Carlin.
Who are you ripping off?
That is so true that I am mad I didn't realize it first. He's not Eddie Murphy, man. He's Carlin, dude. That's what we're talking about here. And the most important part of that, Carlin knew how to organically evolve. Carlin was able to stay relevant for 50 years. No other comedian can touch that. When he needed to, Carlin evolved. Eddie Murphy never did. Chris Rock can evolve.
Hey, I'm out of here. Y'all take care. Thank you.
Feel free to write in the comments what you thought of Tambourine. Also, I'm always curious who you guys are watching and listening to, so write your favorite comedians down below. Maybe I'll do a video essay on them down the line. Like, comment, subscribe, all of that. It's been such a pleasure, and I'll see you soon. Bye.